is the thing that's gotten me ahead musically.
Yeah, but you got to get along with people, man. You know, otherwise, too much conflict, too much hostility in a group.
Yeah, then you got to become a leader.
Oh boy. So we're live here. I'm just setting things up. I'm Brett Premack, the jazz video guy. This is my friend Bill Goodwin, who's a drummer of some renown. I mean, your resume, man. I mean, you've played with so many people over the years. One of your biographies said that one of your first gigs was with Charles Lloyd. Is that true?
That was my first professional gig when I was 17.
Where was that, Bill?
Well, we worked mostly at a coffee house in Pasadena, California, called the Dragonwyck, with a Y, W-Y-C-K. Dragonwyck was a coffee house. Charles had a steady weekend there. He was a student at USC then. Bobby Hutcherson was in that group, and Herbie Lewis, the bass player. They were 18. I was 17. Charles was about 19 or 20. We looked up to him as the older man.
Yeah. And was Charles playing like he did a few years later? Charles took off. First he was with Cannonball. Well, Chico Hamilton, Cannonball, and then the group. And I mean, Charles in the late '60s, the Charles Lloyd Quartet was one of the biggest groups in jazz. Did you have
correct.
Did you have an inkling of that when you guys played together back then?
Well, when I worked with Charles, the 6 months that I was in the group, he played alto. He played alto and flute. But then when he was getting ready to go to New York, he said he had to switch to tenor because alto wasn't the proper instrument to play in New York.
Really?
Yeah, he had a whole theory about it. You know, tenor, man, that's the New York stick, he used to say. You got to play the tenor.
So he had not played the tenor before that? He just picked it up?
Well, they're all kind of the same. They're pitched differently, but, you play one, you can play all of them.
Yeah.
It's a matter of transposition sometimes. I play saxophone too, so.
Oh, really?
Not well.
I did not know that.
Well, I haven't played, in like 60 years.
Wow.
I gave it up when I was a teenager, but I played all through high school and, junior high school.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning here.
Yeah.
What happens, Bill, is that I turn this on. It takes about 10 minutes for the audience to build. We've got about 7 people on right now. Hello, everyone. Please let us know where you are. We have comments that come in. Part of this is interactivity, comments and questions. So you're from L.A. Now, your dad was in show business. Your dad was an actor, an announcer. So when you grew up, you kind of came up in a show business family. Were you conscious? I mean, did George Burns come over your house? What was the scene like when you were a kid?
Yeah, occasionally Burns and Gracie came over. I think I remember, those the people that we knew were all in the business, and I lived in a neighborhood that was full of, actors, musicians, people, directors, people that worked in the studios. Toluca Lake is, between North Hollywood and Burbank. And there's Universal and Warner Brothers are literally like a mile away. My dad had been under contract to Warner Brothers at one time. And, and that was the neighborhood. Bing Crosby lived right down the street. I just realized this the other night. Our next door neighbor was the assistant director on not Citizen Kane, the Magnificent Ambersons.
Oh, really?
And Gordon and Sheila McRae lived right around the corner. Frank Sinatra lived about a mile and a half away. Dana Andrews, Bill Holden, a lot of actors, musicians. Manny Klein, the great trumpet player, lived across the street.
Fantastic trumpeter.
Yeah, great guy too.
Yeah, I love Manny Klein. So you're an exciting environment to grow up in, no?
I didn't see it that way. I just saw it as a kind of normal. I never really thought about it that much at all because it was just where we lived and who we knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were folks gave a lot of parties, and there'd be people like I remember being very young, but Nat Cole was there one time, and playing the piano, and Sammy Kahn and Jimmy Van Heusen used to hang out, and there was this one party when Dad had left Burns and Allen to go back to work with Bob Hope, because he had worked with Bob before that, and then Bob made him an offer he couldn't refuse, so he went back to work with Bob, and they had a big party, like going away party, and Burns and Gracie Allen came, and Sammy and Jimmy Van Heusen wrote parodies. They basically like roast my dad, for going back with Hope, and all these people got up and sang. George Burns sang a parody of "The Thrill Is Gone." It's called "Old Bill Is Gone," and I was allowed to come out and hang out a little bit. I was a kid, but I was allowed to, because the kind of a funny story, but I'm a huge baseball fan, and I have a really good memory. It's also served me well as a musician. But at one point, I was such a baseball fan that I got the Encyclopedia of Baseball from like 1950, 51, 52, somewhere in there, as a Christmas present or birthday present. And I memorized the entire thing, including all of the statistics. There's a big reference book like this. So they'd have people, the folks would be having a big party, cocktail party, and my mom would come and get me in my pajamas and my robe, and she'd come out and she'd hand somebody the book. He said, "Ask him anything." And I would perform for about 15 minutes, and then, "Okay, you can go to bed now." I never missed.
And when did you realize you wanted to get into music? Did you start playing when you were a kid? What was the transition to that phase?
Well, we had to be piano. My sisters and I all had to take piano lessons. Started when I was 5 years old, and that went on until I was about 10, 11, and I got interested in the saxophone, and begged for a saxophone, and then got a saxophone, and I got a teacher, and then I got into the band program at my school. They had a beginning instrument program, and band was literally like a 60-piece band where everybody learned to play by playing. And then I played all through junior high and high school. And somewhere in there, around 8th or 9th grade, I started getting interested in the drums seriously, because I used to just play. My friend had a drum or a drum set, and I used to play them for fun. And I loved drummers, and I could, kind of figure out what they were doing. And the thing that really sold it, as far as the drums for me, was I'd become a big West Coast jazz fan, and I was buying his, like Shorty Rogers and the Giants records, and the Lighthouse All-Stars, and Dave Brubeck's early quartet and octet records, and I got fixated on Shelly Manne. He became like an idol of mine. And though I liked all the drummers, but Shelly was just spoke to me, that just like he was talking to me personally. And I went to see the movie The Man with the Golden Arm, and of course he was the drummer on the soundtrack, which I already knew. I don't know if you remember the movie, but at the beginning of the movie, the screen is black, and you hear the hi-hat. And at that moment, and I heard that, it was like I had an epiphany, and I saw my entire life to come flash before my eyes. It was literally all basically came true. I'll play the drums, I'll become a professional musician, I'll travel all over the world, and I'll play with I'll play jazz, I just saw the whole thing. I was 12.
Yeah. Well, that was a pretty exciting jazz scene in the 50s and the 60s in LA before you moved to New York. I mean, you mentioned Shelley. He had a club, Shelley's Manhole. just a lot happening there. You were around when Lenny Bruce was on the scene. Any encounters with Lenny? Ever see him live? Ever talk to him?
Well, I got to know Lenny. Worked opposite him 3 times in my life. The first time was in 1961. I was with my first gig with Terry Gibbs Quartet, the Crescendo on the Sunset Strip. It was a club owned by Gene Norman. You would know from Gene Norman Presents and, the record company. And he was a DJ and had a late night jazz show. I used to listen to him all the time. And he had the Crescendo and he had the interlude upstairs. So I was with Terry Gibbs. We were the band opening act. And we accompanied Ann Richards, who's a singer who was married to Stan Kenton at one time. And Lenny Bruce was the star of the show. So I did 2 weeks and saw Lenny 2 shows a night. I was already a fan. My folks turned me on to him when I was about 15.
Wow.
They had seen him in New York, and said, "Oh, you'd love this guy." They knew I loved comedy, so I said, "You love this guy." And I went out and got records and started listening to his records, and then I'm on this gig, and there's Lenny, and he used to wrap my drum set up every night in the mic cord and do "to" as a preposition, "come" as a verb.
As a verb.
And he'd ask me first, said, "Do you mind if I, use your drums?" I said, "No, man, absolutely not." And every next night of that gig, the sound man would have to get there early and unwrap the mic cord from my drums. It was a long mic cord completely wrapped around my drum set. So I got to know Lenny a little bit, and then I ran into him after that. A couple of years after that, I ran into him in Atlantic City and Miami. And we worked together in Atlantic City, but not in Miami. But he knew me well enough at that point, and he knew that we had mutual friends like Joe Maney and Jack Sheldon, and Leroy Vinegar, Bob DeRoe. He knew that I knew those people, so we would just chat.
Yeah.
We talk about all kinds of stuff, and I never tried to gush too much, but he was as important to me as Miles or Coltrane or
absolutely
Sonny or anybody, man. This huge influence on my life.
Yeah, he was very close to a number of musicians, including Philly Joe Jones.
Yeah, he's good friends with Joe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lawrence Marable.
And he influenced me when I was 14. I used to memorize his bits. In particular, the Palladium.
I believe Julian Elton has left a wig in the closet many years ago. You seen a lot of people come out here, they, can't, get a laugh or anything, but you've changed the architecture of the theater. That is one of the greatest. That's a 20-minute bit with one guy, and he creates like a mob scene at the end. Well, I listened to that so many times, man. I could pretty much quote everything from that record, all of those fantasy records.
Yeah, well,
I really had them all memorized.
Before he got into his legal troubles, his bits were like little movies, like
That's
Father
right.
Flotsky, how to entertain, how to cool out. I forget the title of it. Your colored friends at parties.
How to make your colored friends comfortable at a party.
Yeah,
That was with Eric Miller, who was a guitarist, folk singer, pal of Lenny's. He's on that record, Eric Miller.
Yeah.
He used to play in the folk clubs in L.A. I was a denizen of all the clubs, the jazz, folk, whatever, rock. What do you got?
Yeah.
I checked it all out.
Well, let's play some music here. We're gonna play something by Gary Burton, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. That's my guest today, Bill Goodwin on drums with the Gary Burton Band, back in the 69 or 70. How did you get with Gary, Bill?
He called me, and I had been, friends with Gary and Steve and Bob Moses, and the guys who played with Gary, and they were all friends of mine, and we used to hang out when they would come to L.A. And then I would go to New York for business once in a while, and I would always look them up, and we were in that same young musician circle. So one day, I was actually in 1968. I spent the whole year with George Shearing, mostly on the road with George. But I was home and I got this phone call from Gary. He said, "So, Steve, Roy Haynes is leaving the group, and we've been talking about drummers, and we thought of you. But would you be interested in the gig?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He said, "We can't. We've known you for a long time, but we can't remember what you play like. So would you?" I had to go to New York and audition. So Gary flew me to New York, and I went to his house in Long Island. Swallow came out from New York, the city, and we played one tune, and he hired me, and I went back to L.A., gave my notice to George, and went off to join Gary in January of '69.
Now you would
funny sidebar on that, though. The same week I got the phone call from Gary, I got a letter from Kenny Drew from Copenhagen. He said that Red Mitchell had highly recommended to me. He needed a drummer for a 6-month gig in Copenhagen, the house gig at the Montmartre that he did for years, and that Red had recommended me very highly, and was I be interested in coming to Denmark for 6 months to work with him. You know what that gig was? You play with Kenny Drew, Nils Henning, or Sid Pedersen, and you play with like Ben Webster one week, Dexter Gordon the next week, Clark Terry the next week, Sweets Edison the week after that. So, very attractive opportunity. But Gary had just called me, and I said I really wanted to go to New York, and I wanted to be in a band of, my peers, basically. Yeah. So that's what I did.
So before then, in L.A., you were playing a lot of quote-unquote straight-ahead jazz. Now you're moving into this new thing. Gary's music was a little bit different. Did you guys feel you were entering into some new musical frontiers in that band?
Well, we were exploring that in L.A. I was in the band that was led by Paul Horn, the saxophonist and flutist. It was all young, fire-breathing people thinking avant-garde. And I had been playing for years, a couple of years at that point. Through the early 60s, I started playing with Gary Peacock and Dennis Budimir in the context of Bud Shank's group, and then also our own gigs and we recorded with those guys, and we had a group with Anthony Ortega, the alto player, who was a early avant-garde alto player, wonderful player. So and then Paul Horn's group, we were experimenting with different time signatures, and I had been very much exposed to the avant-garde music, and I was a working musician in L.A. I wasn't turned down any work. Playing jazz, playing commercial music, like whatever,
Yeah. We got our first question here from a man named David Broadfoot. Question, Bill, I didn't know you played with Art Pepper and Dexter Gordon. How'd that come about? So how about a few words about Art Pepper and Dexter Gordon? Well,
I met Art when I was a teenager. I was living and going to school in Palm Springs, California, and he came down and ended up living. I guess his wife at that time, Diane, her sister was married to a guy who owned a little hotel, and my folks had a little motel right on Indian Avenue in Palm Springs. So a friend of mine comes in where we were hanging out one night. He said, Art Pepper is at the Rossmore, which is the name of the hotel, and he wants to play, and wants a drummer. So there was a piano player who was a comedian. He played 2-beat piano, but he knew a lot of tunes, but it was all like oonch, 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 oonch. But he knew a lot of tunes, and he would sing these parodies. And there was a guy who owned the hotel, had a snare drum and brushes. So I ran in there, and I said to Art Pepper, "I play drums. Can I play?" And he said, "Yeah, come on up." So they're playing with Art Pepper, who was one of my idols, with the snare drum and brushes. And we hit it off. We got to be, social friends. And then he eventually introduced him to some of my teenage musician friends. And he came to our high school and did an assembly. And he and I, became friends. And then when I moved back to L.A. about a year later, we stayed in touch. I used to drive him. He occasionally would need a ride or something, and I would, help him out, drive him around and stuff. Then eventually, when he would always tell me, keep my eye on you when I think you're ready, you can be in my group. So eventually, I think when I was 22, I was actually in his group we had a group for a while, and we did that. I don't know if you ever saw the Jazz Casual.
Oh yeah.
TV show with Ralph J. Gleason. That was when I was 22, San Francisco with Art.
Yeah.
And Dexter, I met at jam session when I was a teenager in LA. I used to go to the jam sessions, and he used to appear at one every Monday night at the Watkins Hotel. And the drummer, Kenny Dennis, was the house drummer there, and he would run the session. And I think that particular night that I met Dexter and played with him the first time was John Huston on piano and Herbie Lewis on bass. And Herbie was my friend. He was always telling people, you should let Bill sit in. He plays really good, And they'd look at me like, yeah, I don't know, But he got me up there with Dexter, and I got up there with Sonny Stitt another time. And, I was pretty fearless. I was, 18 years old, man, trying to get it together. And playing was a little inconsistent, but I started playing with Dexter, and I really had a good time, and he really liked it. And, we kind of hit it off. And over the years, we stayed in touch. And I would always see him not when he was in Europe, but I would see him when I started seeing him again when he started came back in the 70s to New York.
Yeah. And
then we started touring, and we actually did, we were actually in a lot of the same places touring with Phil. Be hanging out. I'd be there with Phil, but I'd just hang out with Dexter all the time. And people would be surprised that I was actually the drummer with Phil. They thought I was at one place. I think we were in Brazil, and I was with Dexter everywhere, every day. There are people. Then I got up and played with Phil. And we thought you were Dexter's bodyguard.
It's interesting, Bill.
He's a great cat.
Because you came up in an era when these guys were around. You would spend time with an Art Bepper or a Dexter Gordon. You'd learn from the masters firsthand. Now, you're an educator for a while now, William Patterson. It's different. Young musicians can't go out there and play with the masters like before. Jazz education has become a whole other thing. Do you think that type of jazz education was better than the jazz education we have today?
Well, I would say so, except I've been teaching at the college for 20 years, and everybody on the faculty at that college is a working jazz musician on the jazz faculty. And the students, they don't have the advantage that I did being born when I was born. So they're never going to see like Louis Armstrong or Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra or Miles Davis or Coltrane or, all these people that I got to see, some of whom I got to know, some of whom I got to play with. But there are a lot of great musicians around, and if if they go in and they go to sessions, and when they start up again, they were before, then they'll do whatever they're going to do. I've been there 20 years, and I've seen many of my students go on to different things. A lot of them are playing, a lot of them are teaching, a lot of them are, doing different things, being professional musicians, working musicians. It's just that, there's not it's not the same scene.
No, it's a
but we're not telling them that they're gonna, learn some scales and some rudiments and then be able to go out there and compete. I told you're going to be out on your gig, and I'm going to come in and sit in and try to cut your ass. So it's the way it's the way it is. It's the way it was, the way it is. But as I've often said, it was just the amount of opportunity and work in both LA and New York during that time when I was, getting together and gigging. It was just exceptional. Nobody's making any money. So most of my friends tried to get into the studios because they could make some money. But, I wanted to play. So I was always looking for opportunities to travel and play. That's what I ended up doing with my career. Though I did quite a good bit of recording and so forth as well. It wasn't all jazz.
Yeah.
Wasn't all jazz records. I mean, I made records with Tom Waits. I made a record with Dave Van Ronk. You know, I recorded with the Jefferson Airplane. I recorded with the group Them after Van Morrison had, left the band, an Irish band, and I did the whole Schoolhouse Rock series with Bob Dorough. Pretty much 80% of that drumming on that, and very various stuff. But I always wanted to play creative music, and I thought probably New York was the more exciting possibility.
Yeah. Now, after you were with Gary, you ended up settling in the Poconos. How did that happen? Why the Poconos?
Well, I went to visit Bob Dorough, my aforementioned friend I'd worked with Bob in the 60s in L.A., and we were accompanying Chad Mitchell, the folk singer, at the Troubadour. And he and we had all these mutual friends, and he and I hit it off. We literally became, it was like my friends used to say, "Hey, do you know Bob Dorough?" I said, "Well, no, I like his records, though. And so you guys will get along great." Well, we met, and we were like best friends within like a day. And we stayed he's pretty much like my best friend in the world from that time on. Very long, friendship. He hired me, supported me, gave me gigs, brought me out to visit him in the Poconos, and I kind of fell in love with that area and moved out there in 1970. And there you have. I mean, I had a place in New York, but I spent most of my time in the Poconos, and then I decided to give up the place in New York. Except in the late 80s, I had a place in New York where I mostly was in New York during that 5 years, 85 to 90. But I was also had a place in the Poconos, and I was on the road all the time.
So you're in the Poconos, and also a resident of the Poconos was a gentleman that you ended up working with for a long time. Before we talk about that, let's listen to Phil Woods Quintet. Oh, yeah.
Well, all right.
So that was Phil Woods on alto, the great Tom Harrell on trumpet, our dear friend Hal Galper on piano, Steve Gilmore on bass, and our guest today, Bill Goodwin on drums. Bill, 40 plus years with Phil. How did you get with Phil originally?
My sister introduced us.
We should tell our viewers that Phil was married to Bill's sister, Jill.
That's correct. Yep, that's right. Her first husband introduced me to Charles Lloyd. He's a piano player in L.A. named Terry Trotter.
Wow.
He introduced me to Charles and introduced me to Bobby Hutcherson, introduced me to Herbie Lewis. And so my sister, I realize, has been maybe my most important person in my musical life for many years. And she's a great gal, and she always loved music and loved musicians. So she and Phil hooked up. He actually came and stayed. They came east and didn't have any place to stay, so they stayed with me in played my farmhouse in Pennsylvania in late 1973. And of course, I've been following Phil since I was very young. He was one of my favorite players, but I didn't know him. I heard him play. I stood right next to him backstage at the Newport Festival, but I'd never spoken a word to him. And he came to my house, so naturally we figured we would get together and play and maybe get some gigs or something. And it turned out we worked together for 41 years.
Now that is a very long gig. You know, that's
the longest, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's longer than all my marriages combined. My goodness. I
think most side people or rhythm sections, I mean the MJQ was pretty close, except they broke up for about 8 years. When Milt left the band, and then Connie, of course, got sick the last few years of the MJQ, but that was about 40 years that those guys were together. But, Phil and Steve Gilmore and I were together for that entire time. We were the only, we were the three constant members of that group from February of 74 until the end in 2015.
Now, our friend Ted Pankin aided and abetted Phil with a new autobiography that came out recently. In fact, we did a show about that a couple of months ago. And if you want to know more about Phil, besides his music, obviously you're going to want to check out this book. When someone asks you, why did you stay with Phil that long? What was it about your association that made it so what it was?
Well, I think the music speaks for itself. So it was really, really good music, probably the best thing that I was going to be able to do. When we started, Steve and I, Gilmore and I used to talk about this, that you think, after about 5 years, we said, so what do you think? We should keep doing this? And because Steve and I, before we started playing with Phil, he and I were working with a lot of different people. We were very busy as a, bass and drum team, playing with a lot of people. And they said, well, Steve said, I really don't think it's going to get better than this. We had a chance to build a body of music, with one of the greatest, saxophone players I ever heard. And everybody in the band was a great player, and we played music that we loved, and people liked to hear it. We were very popular. So, making a living, traveling all over the world, playing music that we loved for people that liked us. So it seemed like a good idea at the time. You can't really plan these things out. I mean, who knew my sister was going to bring Phil Woods to my house, first of all.
Yeah. Yeah. And
so I already knew Steve, and I knew our original piano player. I was kind of the guy who got those early groups together to a great degree, and I think probably recommended just about everybody who ever played in the group, including Hal. Hal and I had been friends for years before he played with Phil, and we had worked with Stan Getz together in 72, I think, 72 or 73. And, Hal and I had liked playing together. We had a hookup in our conceptions.
Yeah, Hal's a fantastic musician and a great teacher. Who was the original pianist in the group?
Mike Melvoin,
Mike Melvoin. And then after Hal...
pianist from Newark, New Jersey.
And then after Hal left, was it Bill Charlap?
Jim McNeely.
Jim McNeely, right. Wow.
Then Bill Charlap, and then Bill Mays the last few years, 5 years with Bill Mays.
Wow.
Bill Charlap was there the longest. He was there 15 out of the 40.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Bill runs the jazz program at William Patterson now, right?
Yeah, he's the co-director along with Dr. Dave Dempsey, who's the administrative director. Bill's the co-director and director of ensembles.
Yeah, and some great trumpet players in the band. You had Tom Harrell and Brian Lynch. And
that was it. Yeah, we had a great trombone player,
Hal Crook. Yeah,
for 2 years. Then Brian came in, and Brian stayed from that time on. He was in the band for 23, 24 years.
Wow. You know, there's something about musicians staying together for a long period of time, playing together on a consistent basis, that makes the music even better. Because you breathe together, you just, there's nothing like that. Sadly, that doesn't happen that much anymore. Musicians don't travel as consistency. You don't find the working bands that we had in the past.
Well, the leaders these days seem to be more interested in having a lot of bands rather than just one band. I've always had, for my own projects, I've always, had more than one thing going on. But I figured if you're going to be out of work with one band, you might as well be out of work with 4 bands,
Yeah. We've got a couple questions here.
Yeah.
From Daryl Scott says, "Hi, Bill. Tell us about your setup, your drum setup. What is it? What do you use? What kind of drums? What kind of sticks? What kind of cymbals?"
None of the things that you've seen on the videos are currently in use. I've been using an old, probably 50-year-old or more Slingerland drum set, wood drum, maple drums, 2 cymbals. They're old A. Zildjian cymbals and various different hi-hats. And very different hi-hats and cymbals, but lately I've been using the old A. Zildjian rides, two, sometimes 3, but mostly 2. They'll use a special cymbal for, a recording session. I might bring out a Chinese or a splash or something like that, depending on the music. Or I might, augment the set with, bells and whistles and wood blocks and so forth, which I'll do if I'm playing more avant-garde music or more orchestral type playing. I'll add to the drum set, add little pieces and small sounds. But mostly it's a four-piece jazz drum set, Slingerland drums, using old, everything's old, Ludwig snare. But I have, various, I have 2 or 3 drum sets. Those are mostly the ones that I play when I play out. I stopped taking drums on the road with me, 15 years ago or maybe more. I will just go out and play whatever they got for me, including cymbals. And I use different size sticks. I always have different size sticks for different rooms, different days to practice with heavier sticks, warm up with heavier sticks, play lighter sticks. When I'm gigging, sometimes it kind of depends on the place and the music. With Phil's group, I had to be very sensitive to the overall sound because we played with no amplification a great deal of the time.
Yeah.
Which meant that the onus was on me to make sure that everybody could be heard.
Yeah. Speaking of Phil's group, one of our says, "Don't forget Harry Leahy." Who was Harry Leahy?
The guitarist was in the band from 76 till 77, middle of 77, about a year and a half. He was, we got Harry in the band at the behest of Mike Melvoin, our originally piano player. Harry was a very well-known New Jersey guitar player and teacher, and wonderful player who joined the band to do that Showboat recording. That was kind of the recording that made us more famous, made the group pretty well known live at the Showboat.
Yeah, that was a great
And
record.
that released in '76. Harry joined the band for that, and then we liked him so much that we kept him in the band. He had to leave eventually because had some illness in the family, and I don't think he could make more money staying home and giving guitar lessons. But he's a wonderful guy, authentic, great player, and a beautiful person.
David Broadfoot is back with another question. From all your performances, do you have a standout gig or tune that you recall?
That's a hard one, David. I know David from my trips down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, to play at the W.C. Handy Music Festival. I met David down there. And I don't know, memorable, I think came immediately to mind as playing a concert with Tom Waits opening up for a rock band, and nobody wanted to hear us, and they were basically insulting us and yelling things all the way through. And we persevered. I never heard anyone curse out an audience like that. That was a really exceptional use of language. Tom, actually, obviously he's, a big time English major. That guy.
Yeah.
So
now
I don't know. They've all been good. I think getting to play with the big, the really good players when I was really young was notable for me. And I remember one of my biggest thrills was getting to know and play with Leroy Vinegar, the great bass player, because I was part of his group for a couple of years. I made my first kind of official jazz recording, 1964, with Leroy, Mike Melvoin on piano. And Leroy, I moved across the street from Leroy, and Les McCann lived next door to Leroy. And I moved across the street, and he came up to me at Shelley's Club, as a matter of fact, and I had never met Leroy. He just walked up to me and said, "Hey, man, I heard you moved across the street." I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "Well, come over tomorrow, and I'll make you breakfast." And I did, and we hit it off and became like best pals, and I played with him for a couple of years.
Yeah. Mark Zettler says, Pat and Mary Dorian and I go way back. What was it like playing in Phil's big band versus the smaller quartet?
Oh, that's interesting because, I played in Phil's quartet, quintet, we had a sextet, we had an 8-piece band, little big band, and we had the big band. And it was a special project. We made a record and then got a chance to tour in Europe. And, playing-wise, it was like playing in a good big band. And we had good arrangements and everything. It isn't like, they tried to bring that small group feeling to the big band, but it's funny, strangely enough, Phil had something else in mind. He used to get on the rhythm section about, wanting us to play in a more regular, more downbeats, and it was kind of stylistically different. And we tell him to fuck off. Pardon my French.
Well, if anything,
man, play the alto. Don't tell me how to play.
Phil was could we say Phil was an opinionated fellow and wasn't shy about expressing his opinions?
I would say hardly. But we all have opinions. Not everybody's right all the time.
Yeah.
And that group was much more of a cooperative than it was a patriarchal leader sideman situation.
Yeah.
At least that's the way it started. It became, he became more in charge as time went on. But that was basically like a musical director.
Yeah. And
he wanted to tour with the big band, and so he got us the band on the small group on board, and then we hired the band. It was mostly our local guys that we played with out here in Pennsylvania. Were in that band with a few ringers, and mostly it was our friends. And we had the music and we had the book, and we went out and played on the road, and nobody really made any money, including Phil. At the end of the tour, he says, "So Bill," I was a straw boss, the paymaster on the band. He says, "So Bill, next time I tell you about one of these ideas, tell me not to do it." But talk me out of it. That was it. Yeah, talk me out of it.
Yeah. And didn't you produce a couple of records with Phil?
Yeah, about 40.
40.
Produced a lot of records, Brett, not just for Phil, but for a lot of other people too.
Oh, who were some of the other people you've produced records for?
Well, Tom, I did six records, I think, for Tom. I produced a record for Keith Jarrett, actually, the Live at the Deerhead, with Gary Peacock and Paul Motion. Stephanie DeKazian, several records for Stephanie. Dave Frischberg's songbooks. I produced Bob DeRose, 4 records for Bob. The long list. I can't remember. I have very bad, strangely enough, my great memory, but I can't remember all the records I made or all the people I produced. Or it's like I don't keep track. It's just like a pile of CDs and LPs and stuff. But Phil was my first big real account. They gave me the entree into being able to go to record companies and have something to promote, and you could take that group anywhere. They everybody wanted us, and we recorded for a lot of people, notably Concord and Chesky. I even did a date for a Blue Note with Phil, but that was his date that he had Johnny Griffin. It was Phil and Johnny Griffin.
Yes, that's not a bad front line. Phil
Produced
Woods and Johnny
Pete
Griffin.
LaRocca's record, comeback record for Blue Note.
Yeah.
Swing Time record. Liebman's on some of that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Deerhead Inn, which is a wonderful place, a performance venue. Is it true that you live above the Deerhead Inn now?
I have had a place there for 15 years now.
Wow.
It started as kind of a crash pad office, and then I've been pretty much there most of the time after the last 13 years or so.
And for those of our viewers who are outside of that area, tell us something about the Deerhead Inn. Exactly where is it located, and is it strictly a jazz place? What kind of music is presented there?
Well, as far as music, it's been a jazz club forever. I first went there over 50 years ago. Bob DeRoe took me there. The local joint is like an old country inn. There's rooms there, and they have a bar and restaurant downstairs, and there's 3 permanent residences upstairs. There's me, one of the owners, and the owner's mother, who's 102 now. She's living there. And then there's hotel rooms upstairs, rooms in the inn. I've had music policy has been a jazz policy for, I don't know, since the 50s.
Wow.
Longer than anybody as far as we know. Maybe the Village Vanguard, except the Vanguard was more of a cabaret before they started having just jazz there. Whereas the Deerhead was a jazz club. They had Dixieland, started as a Dixieland joint, and then became like a home base for the piano player we were talking about before, Johnny Coast Jr. And then changed hands and became like a place where people played on the weekends, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We had a regular jam session there on Thursday nights. All this stuff had gone by the boards during the pandemic, of course, but Deerhead is back to 3 days a week now, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Great.
Yeah, people come from all over, mostly New York or the local area, and play. I played there many times. We started a label there, which I was instrumental in starting off. Live at the Deerhead, all recordings done live at the Deerhead. I think our first recording was 3 guitars with Bucky Pizzarelli, Ed Laub, and Walt Bibinger. And then we did 5-play, which is a small group from Diva. It's Sherry Miracle. We did Joe Locke with me and Tony Marino, Jim Riddle. We did, just stuff, people that played at the Deerhead that we like.
Yeah.
And like I'm blanking out, right? My memory is so good. Right?
It's okay. It's not an issue here. Well, we burned through an hour here. You certainly have a lot of stories and a lot of great experiences. I'm going to play something with your current trio, but before we jump off here, in addition to the Deerhead and teaching at William Patterson, what else are you working on these days, Bill?
Well, I'm just practicing right now because I haven't really had any gigs. I got some stuff coming up this summer, so I'm trying to get my chops in shape, some endurance, to play the drums. And I'm working on a memoir. And there goes that memory thing again. I can remember in detail things that happened 50 years ago, but I don't know what I had for breakfast.
There you go. Yeah.
So I'm working on it actually with Gene Perla. He and I have been working on that together. And I got some plans for some recordings and, the new recordings that I want to do. And I'm thinking of doing a West Coast trip just to go out and I haven't tried setting anything up yet, but I want to go out and play with some of my friends on the West Coast before I get too old, while I can still play.
Well, hopefully
you'll get back to playing in the city from time to time. And the trio that you're going to play, this is the guys I've been playing with now for 3 or 4 years, and I love playing with them. They're wonderful, and I'd like to record more and play with them more, which I'm definitely planning to do.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I want to thank you for taking the time to work with me to set up this, so the technology here so that it worked. It turned out great. You look fantastic.
Oh, that's good, Brett.
And
thank you.
I wanted to...
You notice the difference in the hair? The hairstyle has changed a lot over the years. You dig?
You dig? Yeah, this has been kind of a wild week for us because on Monday I celebrated my 15th anniversary as the jazz video guy.
That's so great, man.
March 29th, 2006, I posted the first video as the jazz video guy. Here it is, 2,500 videos later, 50 million views, and we're going strong. And yesterday I had the honor of being named by the Jazz Journalists Association as a jazz hero. So I want to thank you.
I saw that. Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
So I want to thank my friends Susan Brink and Howard Mandel and all the other folks at the Jazz Journalists Association for making that happen. Next week, my guest will be a guy that you might have heard of, Bill, Louis Nash.
The perfect drummer.
Yeah, Louis is an
one
amazing
of my
drummer.
one of my favorite drummers, and a beautiful person, and I admire the guy very much. And
yeah, we're really looking forward to it. And 2 weeks after that, this is like drumming month on Jazz Video Guy Live. Steve Gadd will be our guest.
Oh, yeah, he's good.
Oh yeah, he's good. I talked to him last week. He was in England playing with Eric Clapton for a week. So I said,
I've been playing with Eric on and off for years.
Yeah. So we're going to go out here with Bill's trio, and I'm sure we're going to have Bill back again. Everyone, please stay healthy. Keep listening to jazz. And once again, a giant thank you to the great Bill Goodwin.
Thank you, Brett. Great to see you.